Welcome, everyone, and welcome to AIPAC Policy Conference 2020. Let me tell you about the title of this session, Defying the Trend, Expanding the Pro-Israel Movement Across Communities. Let me introduce our panelists, our wonderful panelists, a bipartisan panel, by the way, but we'll get into the details. With us is Kimberly Reinhardt, owner and principal of Gray Zone Strategies. Thank you very much for being with us.
Absolutely, thank you.
With us also is the New Mexico State Auditor, Brian Colon. Right sitting next to me, law enforcement. Gotta be careful here. Sheriff Steve Tompkins from Suffolk County. Thank you very much for being with us. And Pastor Matt Shamblin, Senior Pastor, Rose Hill Baptist Church in Ashland, Kentucky. The beauty of this is a bipartisan, but each of the panelists come from a different walks of life, as each one of us, right? But first, I want to start with you, Kimberly. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What led you here to be here at AIPAC? And tell us about the work that you do in your community.
Sure. First of all, thank you. It's a privilege to be a part of this session and to be a proud member of AIPAC. I am a Christian. I believe that all of God's children deserve peace and prosperity, which is a fundamental and foundational truth to my activism with AIPAC. I recently pursued a degree and attained a degree in international conflict management. A professor took a group of us to Israel for 18 days, and I fell in love. I got to feel the dirt, I got to see the people, I got to eat the food, and then from that moment on, my entire graduate study changed. Almost every paper I wrote was about Israel, and my professors were hoping that I would change it up a little bit. No. And I'm excited to share that I was just recently asked to join the faculty of that program to teach. So I just carry that mission forward through academia.
And you're not new to politics. You have been involved in politics for many, many years. Tell us about your involvement with politics with your former members of Congress, now a U.S. Senator.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I like the story of how I first got into it. In the 1980s, I was 12, and the Newsweek magazine came in the mail, and I was shaken to my core because the front cover said that women over the age of 40 were more likely to be killed by terrorists than to get married. And so at the age of 12, I was horrified that there were all these terrorists out there going to kill women over the age of 40. So I was, of course, I wanted to do something about it, and knew at that moment I wanted to go to Washington, work on the Hill, which I did. I worked for 7 years on Capitol Hill on both the House side and the Senate side in senior policy roles. And then I was, until recently in 2017, for 14 years, the federal lobbyist for the University of North Carolina system, which is an $11 billion enterprise. So I have my own company now, as you said, and so I've been a part of the political process since I was 12.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you so much. Please. Mr. State Auditor Brian Colon, you are a very well-known face in New Mexico politics as the former chairman of the Democratic Party in New Mexico. You're also a mentor to so many young folks in New Mexico. Will you be able to share a little bit about your path in politics and why you decided to go down this path?
Sure. Well, it is a privilege to be here today, and yes, a well-known face, and may even seem familiar to some of you because I've been known to be called the Howdy Doody of New Mexico. So those in your room that think that might have a resemblance to that gentleman, Howdy Doody, it is true. I'm also very pleased to have the distinction of being New Mexico's only redheaded Puerto Rican Jew. Thank you. We got the suspenders and the belt today. All right, so I was just saying I'm New Mexico's only redheaded Puerto Rican Jew, very proud of it. Went to Hebrew school when I was a little boy and grew up in Valencia County, where I was the actually one and only Jew in the entire school, which meant they paraded me around classroom to have me put the Hebrew alphabet on the board, which was kind of cool at the time. And then as I grew up, I understood that as I got older, it became a point of contention, my background. But the lens I look through is one that's not different than most New Mexicans. I grew up in poverty, but also had two parents who were disabled. And from the time I was a teenager, I watched my father deteriorate before my very eyes because, you see, he had muscular dystrophy. And people wonder why the path I took is the one I chose. And it's because when I was a teenager, my father at the young age of 49 passed away. From the moment my father passed away, I had not a single relative in the entire state of New Mexico. But what I did have was community that filled the gap and allowed me to live my father's dream for the last 20 years. That was that I'd be the first in my family to go to college and break the cycle of poverty. And along the way, I'm pleased to say it was organizations and individuals and leaders in these types of organizations, whether it was AIPAC, the American Legion, the Elks Club, community affiliates of Seroptimist and Optimist clubs, and Rotarians around the state. They filled the gap for me and allowed me for the last 20 years to be able to say that, yes, I was the first in my family to go to college, break the cycle of poverty, and one generation out from poverty. My 22-year-old son on May 15th will graduate from George Washington University with a biomedical engineering degree. One generation out from that poverty. I mentor as many young people as I possibly can because I believe I've got a debt of gratitude to my community that I'll never be able to repay fully, so I'm gonna die trying. And part of that mentorship is the lens I look through of being a young man who was raised in the synagogue to being also only, what I'm told, is the second statewide Hispanic, actually only the second Jew in the entire 108-year history of the state of New Mexico to be elected statewide to office with 500,000 votes. But I get to take that lens I look through with a very personal story and be able to mentor young men like the one you see here today, up here in the front rows, Christopher Daniel Jaramillo, Paul Moya. Paul's run for Congress. Chris is an incredible attorney, and I'm pleased to pass on and try and repay the debt I owe my community by mentoring and pouring into young men and women in New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Sheriff,
Sure.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We're safe here?
For now.
For now. Sheriff Tompkins, since 2014, you've been serving as the Suffolk County Sheriff, in addition to be the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the county and managing well over 1,000 employees,
That's
right?
correct. Yes, sir.
You also are an engaged community leader, and you serve in My Brother's Keeper initiative.
Yes.
Can you tell us about the role and how your role as law enforcement impact the community when it comes to young leaders, when it comes to other folks in your county?
So let me give you a little background. First and foremost, for over 20 years, I was in television production. I was a television director and producer. I found my way just by happenstance into the criminal justice system when a friend of mine, my predecessor as sheriff, recruited me to run her communications department. I reference that to say this: I didn't come up through law enforcement, I didn't come up through corrections. And so my lens is a little bit different. It's a little bit wider. And I do believe that in this country, we really need to be more rehabilitative and less punitive, you see. On any given day, on any given day, I have over 1,200 inmates. 65% of those inmates are either Black or Latino. This is in the same, in the Commonwealth, where that same demographic is 18%. So how do you get 65 out of 18? It's racism and a whole host of other things. 70% of our population presents with some form of drug abuse use. 42% of our population suffers from mental illness, from the most passive to the most aggressive. 32% of our female population is dual diagnosed, meaning that they suffer both from mental illness and substance abuse. And so when you talk about mentoring and when you talk about how we reach back to our young, it's not enough to be a desk jockey. We have to be out in the community getting stuff done. We have to save lives, and that's really what I see. It costs over $55,000 annually to incarcerate one individual. As I said, I have over 1,200. In corrections, we spend $80 billion annually. 80 billion with a B, you see. And what brings me to this work is this. I grew up in Harlem, in the projects, single parent. Now here was the interesting thing about my mom, and I've got a younger sister. My mother was a functioning alcoholic. So she would go to work every day, do her job, come home, take care of her kids, and then drink herself to sleep. And that's because she was depressed after she and my father divorced. And so I became at a very young age what they call parentified, meaning that now the child is taking care of the parent. And so that has crossed over into the work that I do every day today, is to work with individuals that haven't realized the so-called American dream, that ideal that says every citizen should have the opportunity to achieve success and prosperity through hard work and determination. A lot of our citizens haven't attained that and haven't gotten that. And at the end of the day, we are our brothers and sisters' keepers. And I wholeheartedly believe that. So I think it's incumbent upon folk like us here, folk like the people in our audience, to really reach back, wrap their arms around their loved ones, their friends, their neighbors, and maybe even strangers that they don't know, to say, we can do better, we must do better. And let me close by saying this. I mentioned that my mother was a functioning alcoholic, and this is what endeared me to Jewish people in the Jewish community. She worked at a medical malpractice law firm called Bauer & Gardner in New York City. And she started with them in the late 60s, early 70s, when it was like a 3 or 4 man shop, left when it was over 100 lawyers. Although she had her difficulties, these individuals wrapped their arms around my mother, to make sure that she would have a paycheck every week or every other week, however they did it back in the day. All of my after school and summer jobs was at this law firm. When I got accepted to college, Mr. Bauer called me in and we talked about school, and he said to me, if you want to go to law school, we'll pay for it. He didn't have to do that. And so this was something, but unfortunately I had to go to law school, but I should have. But the bigger issue is that it was the Jewish community, Jewish people, that wrapped their arms around African Americans and said, we got you, we got you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you. Pastor, before I go with you for the next question, I want to invite the audience to make sure that they have the question ready. Also, the audience here on site, also to make sure that we have the questions ready. So now, Pastor Matt, thank you for being here with us. You are currently the senior pastor at Rose Hill Baptist Church in Ashland, Kentucky, and serve on the Kentucky Baptist Mission Board and on the Committee of Public Affairs with the Kentucky Baptist Convention. You have dedicated your life to promote Christian values while exercising leadership in the community. Now the question, Pastor, is how does your faith and leadership lead you to be an AIPAC activist?
That's an easy step. If I were to share with you how my faith is to make that bridge, take that step into being an AIPAC activist, the gospel according to Matthew chapter 1 verse 1 says the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And so there is no step there. It's a natural fit. If I believe what the scriptures say, then I believe that Jesus Christ I believe that Jesus Christ is the Jewish Messiah. And so with that step, then that leads me immediately back to Israel, and that the promises that God made to Abraham, the promises that he made to Moses, the promises that he made to David, all of those promises are promises that he intends to fulfill. And so those are promises that yet we have not seen fulfilled in total, that we are waiting on their fulfillment, and then believing that scripture that says God will bless those who bless Jerusalem and bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse Israel, then I want to be on the side of the blessing. So my faith leads me into deep involvement in being an AIPAC activist.
Thank you, Pastor. Each one of you has been able to visit Israel. Some of you twice, like you, Brian. How many times have you? Twice, and just once. He needs to be invited again, by the way. Let's make sure that we make that happen. Michael. Anyway, so Brian, I want to start with you. You recently visited Israel for the second time with AIF. And you are constantly interacting with Latino leaders, not only in New Mexico, but around the nation. When they learn about your involvement with AIPAC and your pro-Israel activism, how do they react, especially since you move mainly around a progressive democratic circle?
Well, I think that's a great question. I'll just give you a little more context. I am fortunate to say I'm the former chair of the Democratic Party of New Mexico. I was the nominee for lieutenant governor of our state 8 years ago, and I currently just was elected statewide as the state auditor, and have served coast to coast. Thank you very much. And currently am one of the very few statewide Hispanic elected officials in the country. While we have almost 7,000 Hispanic elected officials coast to coast, we have just a handful of statewide Hispanic elected officials at the present time. And at the time when I was chair of the Democratic Party, I was seen as a very liberal, This was 12 or 14 years ago, liberal chair of the Democratic Party, one of the first to stand for same-sex unions in the country, second, I think, only to the chair of California. And now today, it's an interesting conversation because people are often asking me, as a progressive, as a leader of the Democratic Party, formerly elected chair of 33 counties in New Mexico, how do you stand with Israel? And I say, as a progressive, how can I not stand with the state of Israel? How can I not stand with the one place in the region that is actually a true democracy? How can I stand with the one place in the region that gets it right when it comes to having females in leadership, long before the United States did? How can we get to a point where we don't think it's progressive to allow a dissension among the ranks in a multi-party parliament? How can I not stand with the state of Israel when I look how quickly they embraced rights for the LGBTQ community? You see, so when you ask me, how can you be progressive and support the state of Israel? I say, how can you be progressive and not support the state of Israel? Period. End of story.
Anything else? Oh.
Are you kidding? I could keep going. Let me tell you, we might have the Reverend right here, but I could keep going.
You don't give a politician a right.
That's right. No, look, I think this is. Now let me just say one more thing.
I was
Thank
joking
you.
about the anything else.
I'm sorry.
Just saying.
Let me just say this, as the good sheriff would say. I said that to say this, which is, today, in the year 2020, it is far more difficult, far more challenging a conversation to stand in support of the state of Israel with my Democratic sisters and brothers than it was just 36 months ago. So to have this conversation is an important conversation because we need to be comfortable with our values. We need to be comfortable with the fact that we have shared values and a mutual interest in making sure that we have a strong relationship with the state of Israel and the United States in terms of our security, our values, and our people. This conversation is important because it's not the same time as it was in 2017 for Democratic elected officials. I promise you that. Promise you that.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Sheriff, as Brian said, Israel is perhaps one of the most progressive countries in the world, and in some areas even more progressive than the United States. Yet there is a perception out there that being pro-Israel does not or should not go hand in hand with a leader who identifies himself as progressive. Mm-hmm. So the question for you is, how do you go about making the case for Israel within your own political circles? And have you found any challenges, pushback while defending your stance on the U.S.-Israel relationship?
So the first time, I've been to Israel twice, and the first time I went is because I wanted to get a real good, clear understanding of what was going on in Israel. I don't think our media does what's going on in the Middle East a good service. And so I wanted to see if, I wanted to see if it was a militaristic state, if it was all that they say that it is through our media. And when I got there, I found that wasn't the case, that what we're learning in the media is not necessarily so. And with that information, it gave me the opportunity to talk about my passion for people that have, when you talk about the struggle is real, for people that have endured the struggle forever, you see. And so when I talk to people about that, I say, listen, what you're hearing from mass media, social media, is not necessarily true. The second time I went back is because I enjoyed my first time so much, I begged to go back the second time because it just felt good to be there. Now, interestingly enough, I've got a bunch of Jewish friends, but I've got two in particular, Bruce and Michael. And Bruce is an ardent believer that everything that's going on in the Middle East is at the fault of the Palestinians. Michael sees it exactly the opposite way. And his thing is that his big problem is the settlements, and saying that the settlements shouldn't be happening or occur the way that they are. He also has a problem with President Trump insofar as moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Not necessarily just moving the embassy, but he thought that America should have gotten something back. You know, don't give something away without getting something back. And that's his problem. He's like, look, he thinks that, I don't want to go into what he thinks of the president, but It's not flattering. So, to your question, when I talk about the struggle, when I talk about the global community, when I talk about the fact that the Palestinians aren't going to go away and the Jewish community is not going to go away, they need to find a way, we need to find a way as a global community to ensure that peace and harmony can be found. And so I actually enjoy having that conversation, and I enjoy talking to dissenters because it feels good when you can turn a person's opinion to say, well, you know what, I hadn't seen it that way, I hadn't thought about it that way. Look, tomorrow's not guaranteed to anybody, And so on the global level, on the domestic level, on the community level, which is where I work every day, we really do need to figure out how this whole piece works. And I will close by saying this. When I talk about the struggle is real for Jews, I juxtapose that to the Middle Passage for Africans. Now, I'm not saying one was more or worse than the other, but here's the deal. Africans were ripped from the motherland and brought to the shores of other countries, other places, not as immigrants looking for a better life, not as indentured servants that would have the opportunity to buy their way out of servitude. Africans came as property, as chattel. You can't do that to a group of people. You can't do that, you can't do the Holocaust to a group of people and act like it never happened. So we as people have to wrap our arms, I do believe, around our passion for brotherhood and sisterhood and total community and get with the program that planet Earth is awesome. Now, I know they want to go to Mars. I don't want to go to Mars. I want to stay here. My mother used to say to me when I was a child, she said, look, I want to tell you this, son. Women really run the show. We just let you guys think that you do. So maybe it's time for a female to be president. I don't know.
Thank you, Sheriff. I want to make sure that we are on time. We have a good time still. We're good? Excellent. Matt, next question for you. Can we leave the best for the last one, okay?
Absolutely.
All right, good. So, Matt, the question is, when one refers to Zionism, we immediately associate it with the Jewish community. However, this is a term that we often listen often in our community, in our circles, when we talk about Christian Zionist. Can you explain what that means and how you go about engaging other leaders when it comes to Christian Zionism?
So I think the term Christian Zionism for its usage in the Jewish community would mean much the same in its use in the Christian community. Believing that Christian Zionism is that the land was promised to the Jewish people. It was promised to Abraham, a land that they've never possessed in total, but a land that believing that they will possess in total as it was promised to Abraham multiple times. And so that being said, as a Christian Zionist, I believe that the Messiah is going to return. He's going to reign from the throne of David, and that the land that was promised to Abraham he's going to receive, and he's going to rule over. And so how do I speak that to others? First off, I think we all have to, and I think everyone on this panel would agree that, I don't want to speak for anybody, but I think we would all agree that the Scriptures teach that every person is made in the image of God.
That's correct.
And that because of that, every person deserves dignity, every person deserves to be treated fairly, every person deserves justice, every person deserves our kindness. And in reality, that's something that we see in Israel. Kimry and I were on the AIEF trip together, and it was remarkable. When we were on the Syrian border, here's Syria in chaos, and we're standing in a hospital, a Jewish hospital, and no matter the nomenclature, no matter what side you were fighting on, if you came across the border to the Jewish hospital, you were given the greatest health care in the world. And it was all because, yes, and everywhere we went, every person that we talked to, whether it was with the rabbi in Sderot, whether it was with, whether we were speaking to the Palestinian, whether we were at the hospital on the Syrian border, the theme was the same. Every person is made in the image of God. And we talked to that. We talked to those who were a part of, if a terrorist act happened, they were the first people in. And I was just curious, why would you care for those who have just tried to kill you, tried to kill your friends? And again, the theme was the same. Every person is made in the image of God. And so when we think about Zionism, and when I think about Christian Zionism, it's a natural fit for what we find in Scripture, but it does not deny, but yet affirms the image of God that every person bears, and because of that, it also that is realized in the way we treat people, the way we relate to people, the way we speak to people.
Thank you, Pastor. I want to get into the advocacy of the U.S.-Israel relationship. That's why we're here. And Kimmer, this is the question for you. You are an ardent supporter of this relationship, and you are someone who works on a bipartisan way when it comes to the U.S.-Israel relationship, although we know that you as a Republican openly, willingly meet members of the other party to go to the Hill and lobby on behalf of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Can you share an experience with us that you've had in the past when going to the Hill, or even in your home state,
Sure.
Advocating on behalf of this relationship?
You just outed me as a Republican. I don't think that was public knowledge. No. I went to Washington, D.C. in 1997 to learn the system. And when I got there, what I really learned is how to work the system. You cannot have a cause without a coalition. And your coalition needs to be made up of my friend to my left, Matt, me, my friend to my right. And I say friend genuinely because they are now my friends, and I know I can call them and I say, hey, let's get to work on something together. So if we don't work together as a coalition, we will fail. We will fail. And so that's why I'm so proud to be a part of this movement, because I am valued for what I bring to the table. My friends on the progressive side look at me and value me for what I bring to the table, and I value what they bring. I don't care what your label is. And so it's the same as going into a congressional office. You know, I was always called, Rambo when I was lobbying because I didn't care who we were going in to see. You know, I could talk to anybody because I see people as people, and we share commonalities. It's my job to figure out what that commonality is. So, honestly, my favorite issues to work on are bipartisan issues. I did that when I worked on Capitol Hill, but, mainly because people said that it was impossible. You can't possibly do that. I was like, you want to bet? We did a lot of things because I worked with John Dingell's chief legal staffer. I actually staffed Steny Hoyer in an appropriations committee hearing room on an issue that my boss and he and many others, it was a true, the farthest to the right and the farthest to the left came together, and we won. We held up the whole darn budget and we won. So, this is not an impossible issue. We can overcome the criticism because we just have to keep coming back. We have to have those stories. And that's what I would like to share with all of you is so important. We can go in there, and I hope the political folks from AIPAC don't shoot darts at me when I say this. Use your talking points, okay? But when I go into an office, I'm the color commentary chick. Talking points are out of the way. I tell them a story about when I'm standing on a hill, and I hear the sound of Jewish children laughing and playing in a schoolyard, in the kindergarten. And then I'm informed that not 100 yards down below is Calcilla, where a statue of Saddam Hussein resides. So hearing these beautiful children, these Jewish children, and seeing the hate really had an impact on me. And when I tell that story to a member of Congress, they feel that. They feel it in their gut. And it's hard to look at somebody in the eye and say, I can't support that. Yeah, you can. And if I need to bring out 2 more stories, I got time. So.
Thank you, Cameron. Brian, in New Mexico, obviously, you have worked with your congressional delegation, members of Congress who are currently from the Democratic Party. You have been key to engage them on our issues, but you have faced some challenges as well while working on a bipartisan way. Will you be able to share with us some of the experiences and some of the accomplishments that you have made in New Mexico when it comes to working on behalf of the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Sure. I would just say that I think that, with time comes capacity. And in New Mexico, maybe more so in other places because we're so small. Right? We're 2.1 million people. We've got 5 members of our federal delegation. Each member of our federal delegation has a relationship with many of us. I mean, we're just not showing up when it's time to give a $2,600 check or when it's time to walk and knock. These are real relationships. I knew the Assistant Speaker of the House, Ben Ray Lujan, who's about to be our next junior senator from New Mexico. I knew him when he was dealing cards at a casino trying to get an undergraduate degree 20 some odd years ago. The now about to be senior senator from New Mexico, I remember when he first ran for the city council and came to me for some support because I had been involved in some of the grassroots politics in our community. I remember when the first Native American woman elected to Congress worked for me as my Native American outreach coordinator when I was chair of the Democratic Party of New Mexico. These are deep and real relationships. So when I come to them with a story that is personal to me about the importance of this issue, it hits them slightly different than when the incredible professionals of AIPAC are on the Hill advocating on this issue. So for me, it's always been about the relationships. For me, I'm fortunate that I'm from a small state. I mean, you try and get into the Assistant Speaker of the House's office on any given day, if you're not from New Mexico, it's going to be a little more difficult. If you're trying to see your congressperson from California or your United States Senator from California, might be a little more challenging. But I come from a small state where these relationships really make the difference. Sitting here with a gentleman who's in the top tier of our first congressional district just 2 cycles ago. These relationships in New Mexico are real. We've historically had anywhere from 1 to 2 members of our federal delegation be Republican, and the Republicans had a relationship with me as well, because I'm also known as somebody who's deeply engaged in the economic development community and in the social profit or nonprofit sector. And so I think, at least in New Mexico, and hopefully at least with our congressional delegations in your communities, you'll never undervalue the opportunity to develop the relationship and the rapport, because as civic leaders, as lay leaders on this issue of the importance of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, we can be exponentially more effective than those who are getting paid to be on the Hill. And they know that when they come back to New Mexico, we'll be there to greet them. So for me, I never take that opportunity lightly, and I never take the opportunity lightly to lean in a little bit and make it a little uncomfortable and say, I remember when I had to help you pull out that pop-up tent because you needed some shade to sign up those voter registrants, right? I mean, these relationships are real, and they matter. Even to the incumbents, they matter. And as an incumbent, let us never forget that, yes, incumbents have an edge, but on any given Tuesday of any given year, they can lose an election. And let's not be uncomfortable talking to them about how important it is that they don't lose sight of that.
So I want to follow up on that theme of relationships. So I sit on AIPAC's Policy Council. And in one of our meetings, it was explained to us that in the United States, and if I got this wrong, correct me, that there's only about 2 million Jews in the country. And how important it is for other folk, Latinos, African Americans, LGBT, Native Americans, and others, to align ourselves with the Jewish community to keep moving forward an agenda that works on behalf of all people. So when you talk about relationships, I feel honored, frankly, and I'm not blowing smoke, to be a part of an initiative with a group of people that really care about relationships and care about the country and making it a better, safer place to live.
Thank you very much. You want to add something else?
I just, to the sheriff's point, when I look around and I see all these Capitol Club members and the Senate Club members and all these fancy lanyards, it's a perfect opportunity, I think, for all of us, because you're looking at 7 sponsored trips to Israel amongst 4 individuals who believe deeply in this issue. Those trips don't happen in a vacuum, and they don't happen without you writing the check. So know that you have supported, at least for me, the Hispanic Outreach Program. AIPAC was way ahead of the cool kids today when it said we're going to do outreach into the Hispanic community. Now everybody's doing it, right? The Hispanic sleeping giant has awakened. Now everybody wants to buy into Latino advertising. Everybody wants to buy into Hispanic politics. AIPAC was ahead of its game when it came to doing Hispanic outreach coast to coast. So as somebody, I'll just say for myself, that has been a beneficiary of that, who's a civil servant with a wife who's an educator, wouldn't have been able to go to Israel without your help. So thank you for educating me on this issue.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. We have an online question now, and then I'm going to ask members of the audience, if you would like to ask a question, please stand up. How important is it for you, each one of you can actually answer this, to work with pro-Israel leaders who may not or do not share your political views?
I do that every day. It's a part of being in this world, right? Where our world is changing, it's evolving. We can no longer sit in our bubbles and feel really good about it, right? So we got to get out of our bubbles and get to know all of these other people that we don't know. We're in the National Council together. You know, I had it's interesting that during those meetings, I have developed some very deep friendships with progressives who look at me as this kind of strange unicorn. And you know, they're like, Kimber, you need to run for office. And I was like, what? and those are honest conversations. And it's because we can have that conversation that we can work together. We don't believe the same things on all issues. But that doesn't matter because we believe together on this issue. And that's the only issue that matters in this building. So I don't care where you come from, what your beliefs are. If we're on this issue together, the rest can fly.
But how will you respond? I really like your answer. But how do you respond to the fact, and I'm going to make this up here. Kimberly, you are working with Brian Colon, who happens to support same-sex marriage and who is pro-choice. You are supposed to be working on the issues that you care deeply about as well. Yet you're working on the U.S.-Israel relationship. How do you respond to that question from some of your peers or colleagues?
If I understand your question correctly, is it how can I work with someone who may have a different opinion than I do?
And your circles actually are challenging to say, stop working with a person that is fighting you on other issues.
You know what? You fight one day, you're sitting at the table together the next, honestly, because guess what, folks? In politics, people have really long memories, and you can have respectful discourse and a conversation and walk away respecting one another. That's my personal view. It's not something, and I think we're losing that. And so it's incumbent upon each of us to commit to ourselves to say, I may not agree on this particular issue with you, but let's put that aside. Or let me ask you a couple questions about that because I want to understand. I may not agree with you in the end, but are you willing to help me understand your position? And that's just my personal belief system, and I realize not all people have that belief system, but that's a part of my personal code.
I believe that clear-thinking individuals realize that our differences are our strengths, frankly. And so we may not always agree on be in the same place on a particular issue, but if we take the time to understand where each one of us stands on that issue, Maybe we move closer together. And I think that's the vibrancy of this country and beyond. Our differences are our strengths.
Matt?
I just find that such a curious question, because if you've ever had a relationship with anyone, you're going to disagree with other people. And as a matter of fact, my wife is here today, and we disagree on a lot of things. She's right on all of them. And the reality is, when I stand to preach on a Sunday morning, I have progressives, I have centrists, I have very conservative people in my congregation. And my responsibility is to speak to them all and try to bring them together. I agree with Kimmery, I agree with the guys here on the panel. I believe in America, it has become, and maybe it's not just in America, maybe I have a limited perspective on this, but it's become so easy to vilify the tweet, to vilify the social media post, and forget that there is a person on the other side of that tweet. There's a person who's receiving it, and there's a person who's sending it. And that person is a person that if you desire to move forward on any issue, then you're going to need to recognize their dignity, recognize the value of their input, and recognize that you're not going to agree on everything and every issue. I think it's refreshing. I have to tell you, as they gave their biographies, I thought, why am I here? Because these are extremely sharp, articulate people, and what a privilege it is to sit on this platform with them. And I'm sure that we disagree on many things. But as the pastor, my responsibility is to bring unity together and to speak to people from all walks of life in order to inspire them to a better future, not to condemn them where they are. So I just find some great irony in that, working with people who we differ on other issues. If you have any relationship with anybody, you're going to, as a matter of fact, I find it difficult to agree with myself most of the time. So agreeing with other people, I find that much easier than agreeing with myself. So I just find some irony in that question. But of course, we're always going to work with people who we disagree on other issues, but we have to find a time where we can come together on the things that unite us and not focus on the things that divide us.
Pastor, thank you so much. Very well said. Very well said. We're going to go to a question from the audience here.
I want to commend all of you for your diversity and your continued support for AIPAC. I'm terribly impressed with all of you. My question, I'd like to direct it to Brian. The progressive left of the Democratic Party has become, as you said, in the last 36 months, something very radical and very worrisome to all of us in our anti-Israel position. What can you, the panel, yourself, Brian, and us do to help turn that around?
You know, it's an important thing that we are very intentional about. And part of that is understanding and putting ourselves in the shoes of those policy leaders with whom we'd like to influence. For instance, and before I go on, I want to say welcome to our young contingency from Puerto Rico. We got all the Boricuas that just walked in the backyard. How about a big round of applause for our young people? Thank you. See, I'm obligated to give them a shout out. I'm New Mexico's only redheaded Puerto Rican Jew who goes to Mass every Sunday, by the way, with my wife. Go ahead, think about that later. But let me just say that in my particular situation, we have a brand new congresswoman from the 1st Congressional District. Part of that new class, right? One of the 2 first female Native Americans in Congress in the history of our country. Imagine how many people have tried to be in front of her to have an opportunity to shape her perspective on the issue of the U.S.-Israeli relationship and the importance thereof. So I think I was fortunate in that the relationship far preceded her position of capacity, I would say. And I think that Santiago asked me specifically a little bit about the work I've done. Well, she had a lot of people trying to influence where she would land. And my job was to influence her in a way that allowed her to stay open to the conversation. And I think for people like me that are in a position of capacity to engage the folks that are in these positions of power, our job is to keep the lines of communication open. Right now, if you take some of the hard or far left, we don't even have a line of communication open to get them across the table to talk to them about why we feel like they are so misinformed. And if we can't engage in a conversation, we can't make progress. And if we don't want to make progress, then we have to just cut our right arm off. That's pretty unfortunate. So for me, I think it's about maintaining open lines of communication. That's what I try and do. That's what I'm fortunate to do with all the young, frankly, men of color in New Mexico that I mentor. Try and talk to them about building that network of capacity and support, because like I tell them, no one succeeds in a vacuum, and that every relationship ought to be bilateral, right? And we've been able to leverage those relationships for really important conversations for the benefit of the conversation about the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Thank you, Brian. We'll go to the next question.
In the Jewish world, we have youth that are going to Israel on the Birthright program, thousands and thousands. What is the plan for the Christian community to engage Christian youth in this pro-Israel focus?
To get them aligned with AIPAC. Of course, that's going to be part of it. But to answer your question, at my church, we have a Christian school. We have a Christian daycare. We have a Christian school. I teach in a Christian college. And so at every opportunity, I seek to inform them of the Jewish origins of their Christian heritage and how important that is and how we have to stand with the Jewish community. And an important lesson that history has taught us is if I don't stand with those who disagree with me, then at some point there will be no one left to stand with me. And so there's such a great importance to stand with those who are, as we've talked about, across the aisle in different various religious backgrounds. And so in our context, every opportunity I have, I'm drawing people back to the origins of the Christian faith and in encouraging them. I can tell you this. I don't travel a lot anymore. I used to travel quite often, and the thought of going with a group of strangers, and I'm pretty introverted, and the thought of going with a group of strangers to Israel scared me. And so a lady in my church who was the former pastor's wife, he's passed away since, she's gone to Israel 27 times. And so when I go to her house and she's just excited about me going to Israel, and I didn't express to her my anxiety in going to Israel. And so I think she could tell she's a wise grandmother, so she gave me a menorah to go home with. And so I would have to say, just like she did with me, in encouraging that trip and encouraging that education, we have to, as a Christian, we have to individually do that with others as well.
And I wanted to address, let's clap for Matt. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Matt. I have a 14-year-old daughter. She came with me to policy conference when she was 12, so 2 years ago. And she just loved it, loved it. She came home. She talked to everybody that would listen about Israel, including her 7th grade social studies teacher, who called me not long after and said, Tyler has told me so much about Israel, and we're studying this part of history right now. Would you come in and talk to the entire 7th grade at our school? I was like, heck yeah, let's go. Because then I had 250 7th graders in a rural county in North Carolina. 98% of these children are likely Christians, young people. I didn't approach it from a Christian foundation, but I was able to present the facts. Because folks, the thing that astonished me the most when I went to Israel is the news that we get here is not the truth over there.
That's true.
And so I'm proud that my daughter is open-minded and thoughtful and listens and is a evangelical person on your behalf, on our behalf, to, I mean, I'm sure her friends are tired of hearing about it, but honestly, I mean, I really felt that on that day, I did something important because I reached 250 kids in one day.
We're going to go to the gentleman here.
I just would, if I heard correctly, a guesstimate for the Jewish population in the United States was mentioned incorrectly, as far as I know. Please ask AIPAC for their official count, but the surveys that I'm familiar with put it at somewhere between 5.5 million and 7.5 million.
I thought the number was incredibly low, so I will ask.
Okay.
Thank you. Before we go, let me say this also real quick to Matt. When you talked about your being up on the stage with us, you're here for a reason. Things don't just happen. And when you talk about the struggle that this country is having with morals and values and respect and integrity, you're the apt person, the right person to bring the message, not that we all aren't, but to bring that message. A man of faith who practices this and preaches this every day, that's why you're here. Because we need to hear from you. We need to hear from a person that's steeped in faith to talk to us about morality and values and respect for each other.
Hi, my name is Tamar Shapira. I'm the Deputy Director of Save a Child's Heart in Israel. As a member of an organization that saves children's lives regardless of color and religion or origin, I wanted to thank you. As an Israeli, I wanted to thank you for your support to Israel. Thank you for what you do to strengthen the Israeli-American relationship. And I wanted to take the opportunity and encourage you and your fellows and your colleagues, members of your congregation, regardless of what the results of the elections are, again, to continue and visit Israel, see a different Israel, see other organizations like Save a Child's Heart, who is doing Tikkun Olam and who is trying to make this world a better place for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
You are indeed doing Tikkun Olam. I will just point out that when you talk about the elections, again, with my super progressive friends, I would say, look at this democracy. Not only have they had one election to find a leader, not only do they have two, not only do they have three, they are likely, you believe this, if things go as projected, they will still not find a coalition with 61. There will be a fourth election in an 18-month window of time. This is democracy until your head hurts, like a lachen cup. I mean, it's unbelievable. So thank you for being here. Thanks for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Lois Fishman. I live in Los Angeles, but my question is really on behalf of a nonprofit organization called Fuente Latina, where I serve on the board. What we do is we bring journalists to Israel from the Spanish-speaking media, both from the United States, from Latin America, and Spain, so that we can correct some of those distortions and misimpressions that each of you have really remarked upon. So my question is, do any of you have colleagues who are fluent enough in Spanish whom we could propose as interviewees when we have journalists from the United States or on trips in Israel? You can think about it, and I'll talk to you afterwards.
So for in New Mexico, absolutely. I mean, I think we have some phenomenal leaders in New Mexico that could knock your socks off. They are Fuente Latinas, or did you say Fuente Mujeres? What did you say?
No, Fuente Latina.
Fuente Latina.
It's not for women. It's the source of news. Fuente in the sense of a news source.
Oh,
Or
Fuente.
Spanish. Fuente.
Fuente. Okay. So we have plenty of those in New Mexico that would love to engage with you. So,
Okay, so-
let's make sure we exchange it. If you Google Brian Colon, see, I have an accent on my second O, but I've grown up my whole life as Brian Colon. Can you believe it? Imagine upper and lower, semicolon. My goodness, it's been tough. But it's Colon de Puerto Rico, but I'm easy to find in New Mexico.
Sheriff, thank you so much for joining us. Kimberly, Brian, Matt, we have come to an end, yes. But before we leave, have you ever felt alone doing this work? When you go back to your community, have you felt alone? Do you need the company of the larger pro-Israel community in your community, in your home state? If that is the case, feel free to share. If not the case, that's fine. But what do you need from the larger pro-Israel family here?
So, as far as a Christian is concerned, from the Christian perspective, there has been a theological shift. And that theological shift has resulted in what is known as replacement theology, whereas the church has replaced Israel. And that's a major concern because it impacts the pro-Israel community. And so what as an evangelical pastor, what I need is people like yourself to continue to reach out, especially in a state like Kentucky, in a place like that, to reach out to a local evangelical pastor who's pro-Israel and support him in that. And listen, it speaks volumes. Tomorrow we will go and we will go to the Hill and we will speak on behalf of Israel. And I will be going with my dear friend, Rabbi Shlomo Litvin, and he and I we just spent some time together at lunch. We have so much in common and we work together on so many issues. He, just like the relationships we talked about, he said, I'm trying to get a bill passed in the Kentucky Senate. Do you have any contacts there? And I said, absolutely, I have contacts there. And so I walked out in the hallway, made some phone calls. But reaching out to those who are different than yourself, but reaching out to build that coalition, as Kimmery talked about, is absolutely vital, because there is a change in evangelical Christianity moving away from support for Israel, and that's one of the reasons that I work with AIPAC, because it's the most effective in what it does, and so I want to change the tide on that.
So I do a fair amount of work with the Anti-Defamation League, and with the number of hate crimes that's increasing in the Commonwealth, we don't have the luxury to work in a vacuum. We don't have the luxury not to align ourselves with folk to really address that issue that is off the rails, frankly. And so, no, I never feel alone when talking about doing this work on behalf of Israel and on behalf of the Jewish community, because it's important work and it needs to get done. And I do come from a state where there are a number of schools and intellectuals and a bunch of people that don't know anything about anything, but that's neither here nor there. They want to roll up their sleeves and they want to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. So no, I don't feel like I do this work alone.
I don't either. I'm never alone when I feel that I'm doing the right thing.
Well, thank you very much. Now it's time. Thank you. We are online. Thank you very much for being here, for joining us, Sheriff, Henry, Brian, and Matt. Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.